Okay. The third session was auto manufacturing projection for the EV market, and it gave us insights on where the EV market would go. One thing I took away from there is that one of the speakers said that they would produce 1 million vehicles, EV vehicles, by 2025, which is about 10% of what we produced last year. So I call that significant, and I'm going to have to get warmed up on that. And like I said, I went up there not knowing much, and came back knowing a little bit. So. Into the general session, I don't recall anything that significant came out of that. And then I went to the understanding environmental justice. I know there are a couple of people on this board that was interested in that. I wanted to get a little bit more educated on environmental justice, advancing environmental and social equity. And I still have a lot to learn on that subject. So, and building a renewable energy portfolio. One of the speakers said that his company was manufacturing solar as well as wind aided energy, and it sounded like he was giving a sales pitch about because he said, well, we could come in and do all this and then take it over. And so, but I felt that was very good. So you know, good information. Like I said, I'm still learning, and then I went to the APPA business meeting. There were 12 resolutions. They were all passed all at once, but I picked 3 of them out for discussion. One is Resolution 2201 in support of federal clean energy standards, the reduced greenhouse gas emissions. This resolution was to establish a target of getting to net zero emissions by 2050. I think Tony is. We have what a goal of
2045, net zero by 2045.
So okay, but anyway, and the second one was deviation and risk management for public power utilities. It seemed like this was a interesting subject. You know, I had small questions about it, but it was for in support of non-financial commodity transactions, trade options, and swaps versus the Dodd-Frank Consumer Protection Act of 2010, which says you should have a financial entity. And that's the one I had questions about, Tony. Do you have anything else to say on?
I guess I'd want to understand a little bit more. Ask your question again. What are you asking?
Oh, well, I'm just wondering that you had some comment about non-financial as well as entities helping us, our financial entities. But anyway, it was in support of non-financial entities.
Got it.
And so,
I guess that's something we can kind of think through a little bit. I don't really have it in common.
But I had some questions on that. So, and the third is in support of Colorado River Basin drought assistance. This was I think something that stood out to me. But you know about Lake Mead and Lake Powell going to, and I guess that whole area supposedly going through the drought for the last 20 years. And this was in support of Bureau of Reclamation and Water Area Power Administration to continue implementing cost-cutting measures, and Congress to the Congress to provide non-reimbursable appropriations to the Basin Fund and Dam Fund. I thought that, these three, are three of the 12 that the resolutions that were passed, and they're all passed at once, So, and this concludes my talk in closing. Like I said, I didn't know exactly what I was getting myself into when I went up there. I didn't know that the APPA was so much involved with the renewable energy. I didn't realize that EV production will seems like it's right around the corner. And let's see. I can't think of anything else that come to my mind right now. So,
well, we sure appreciate you taking your time to do that, and bringing us back some thoughts on that. I found it very interesting, that APPA is coming out in support of some reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
yes.
2050 is not exactly an aggressive goal, but
Yes,
but it's still pretty significant that they're saying that. On the EV side, I was just talking to a GRU customer today, a business, and they're looking at adding EV, actually just one EV truck, but that would more than triple their electricity use.
Wow.
Because they're figuring they're going to charge it forward lightning at 2050 every day. It was
Oh, yes.
pretty. They did not have huge use to start with, but it's you start switching to EV trucks. And stuff.
Yes.
It's
And like I said, I thought that this was one of the takeaways I had, and and this is one thing I would like to get to know a little bit more on. So
the stuff with Lake Mead is just. I don't know,
Yes.
they talked about having to shut off the
yes,
dam at some point, or I know they're getting
Yes.
pretty close.
Yeah.
That's
Crazy.
That's crazy. And of course, GRU has a dam fund. I think we call it the general fund transfer, but it's the alternative name. I often hear it called.
No comment.
But I'm not quitting my day job. So, Jason, what do you got?
Sure. So I took a play from Carla's playbook, and I just directly asked for a meeting with Tony when I got back from the conference this year. So apologies, Tony, you're gonna have to hear all this stuff all over again.
Great.
But one of the big takeaways for me was that APPA publishes some really good materials. And so I got 3 different publications on EV, on the future of EVs and planning for that, actually 4. I got a publication on understanding hydrogen trends and use cases. Another one on financial planning and using federal funds for a transformative future. 2 documents on governance, so what we do, and then a new publication that APPA is coming out with, brand new, that's called Governing for Excellence, Raising the Bar on Public Power Governance. And so I don't know the best way to share these materials with folks like in the sunshine and everything like that, but I brought these and I thought if nothing else, people could kind of take a look at the stack tonight. And if you see anything in here that you're interested in, would like to check out, then we can figure out the best way to share that legally, like between everybody. And I'd really, if we have any sort of a budget for this, I'd really like to ask that this newest document, the Raising the Bar on Public Power Governance, if GRU would be able to purchase a few copies of this and make it kind of a standard part of orientation, because we get these sort of trainings and things like that, but to actually have like print materials that you can read and that we're all on the same page with and things like that, I think would be really useful.
Do you have electronic versions of?
They do. They sell electronic versions and printed versions. So either one could be purchased. And I have a flyer for it. And again, I think it would be nice to have some, materials that we could all share.
And real quick before you go, so question for Lisa, we got to get her money for it. Is there an issue, like if we said, okay, if someone wants it, we could take it home, read this thing, then bring it back, and then the next person can do the same? Okay, great, thank you.
Well, like I said, I'll leave this stack out tonight and just would encourage everybody to take a look at it before you leave. If there's anything here you want to borrow, please feel free, because there really are some good publications, and that has been, for me, one of the best things about APPA that I've come across so far, their publications. You guys already heard me at the joint city commission meeting. Some of the things I had to say about EVs that came for me directly from the workshop, and like was already said, I wasn't a strong EV proponent previously, but this conference and this workshop, and then hearing some of the things that other folks on this board have said, have really kind of opened my eyes to what that is going to mean for us moving forward. So I'm really interested in sort of a deeper dive into that topic. I attended one workshop on some of the federal stimulus money that's coming down the pipe. And so this was an important thing that I wanted to point out. The ARPA funds that were already, have already, largely been distributed or in the process of being distributed, those funds were automatic. But the IIJ, which is the even bigger stimulus that was passed, is 20 times larger than the ARPA. Those funds are not automatic. Those are actually going to require applications and maybe grant matching, principal forgiveness, other forms of funding. And so really the folks at APPA were stressing to us that it's once in a generation funding. Okay, this is the kind of money that we do not see coming from the federal government on any kind of a regular basis. And so they were really stressing that folks at the utility, folks at the city need to make sure that they're tracking this information and really actively getting out there and applying for some of these funds, because it's a huge amount of money and it's going to be distributed. So we have a role to play in deciding whether it comes here or if it goes other places. I mentioned hydrogen. I attended a workshop on deployment of green hydrogen. And I've grown up hearing about hydrogen as something that's, 20, 30 years in the future. My whole life, it's been 20, 30 years in the future. Well, there are actually municipal utilities that are doing pilot projects with green hydrogen right now, including Orlando, right down the road from us, is doing a pilot project on this. And so there was another one in Washington State that was doing some really interesting stuff. And so particularly as we talk about storage technologies and thinking longer term with the IRP and things like that, I think it's at least worth learning more about the possibilities of green hydrogen and how that could be integrated.
Before you leave that, and would you rather interrupt in the middle? Or, so it's on the hydrogen, and stop me at any point. The concern has been the efficiency. So I mean, the real pro of it is easily moved around. You can burn it in vehicles, and lots of pluses. But right now, if you took solar or something, wind, and converted it to hydrogen, you'd be much better off just using the power directly. Because of, did they talk about that and kind of where they're going with that?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that came up is, one, I think the efficiencies are getting better.
Okay.
But two, especially when we talk about wide scale deployment of solar, we've talked about those times of the day when you've got this overproduction basically, and how that can be a problem with solar. And so you actually just can't directly use it. And so that you can use that power at that time of day to basically create, basically you're treating hydrogen as storage technology.
So it's almost power you almost were going to throw away anyway. And so you can go ahead and store it.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Very interesting.
And this is completely new to me. I mean, this was not something I'd done any looking into previously and know very little about beyond, what I got out of the workshop. But I know that there are folks 2 hours from us that are doing a pilot with this that seemed really excited about it. And there are other municipal utilities around the country as well that are looking at this really seriously. So I just think it's something that's worth talking about.
Mr. Chair, Eric Walters, can he jump in a little bit and comment on this? Yeah, come up to a microphone, Eric. Good.
So
Also,
that,
if you have any comments on the IIJ funds, because it sounded.
sure. So that's a great point and a great discussion. We've actually been engaging some outside firms. Sargent and Lundy is a large engineering firm. They actually have a hydrogen group that they're starting to work and build on. When you talk about efficiency, the latest information that we got from them was it was a 3-to-1 ratio. So in other words, you need 3 megawatts to make 1 megawatt worth of hydrogen to then burn to make energy. And so with those ratios, you're looking, as you said, Chair, about does it make sense to do that, or does it make more sense to use the energy just directly from solar or somewhere like that? So it's growing and people are doing it, and there's a lot of pilots going on. But right now, I think the best efficiency ratio is about 3-to-1. And so we got to study, does that make sense for us to go down that path to do that? Later on, as that efficiency improves, maybe so. But there are a lot of pilots, and that we're looking into those as well. As far as the grants, we're working with, we got a lot of folks looking at grants too, and multiple departments across the utility. I'm involved with a grant now that we won for Project Empower, which is part of the community weatherization, and working with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, to help underprivileged communities get ready for renewable energy and using their resources. So that's one grant that we're working on. We've also submitted grants for pilot for battery storage, for flow battery storage. We're looking at a number of things specifically for that reason, because the money's out there and they're writing checks. So, hey, let's see if we can get some of those checks. So we are working on multiple fronts to try and take advantage of some of that.
And let me follow up real quick on that too. So we're doing that across the utility. Each of the different operational areas and others are pursuing those grants, and then we're centralizing that work in our budget, finance, and accounting department. We don't have on staff like a grant writer role. We looked at evaluating whether we should do that as this money was coming in, and basically where we concluded is it's much more efficient and cost effective for us to have some specialists help us and not try to hire one person that is kind of jack of all trades. And so we have some folks, specialists in the industry that are helping us with some of that, as well as some even some of our lobbyists. You know, we have lobbyists, City of Gainesville, that are helping to kind of bring in and corral some of those opportunities. So there'll be a lot more to come, you know, with grants. We typically, as a utility, have engaged with grants over the years. We get grants, but as a mid-sized utility, there's typically not a lot available for a mid-sized utility. But with this federal money coming, there's money available for everybody. And so we are absolutely kind of full court press on that and trying to see what makes sense for us going forward.
So what can we do, you know, for any of this to support your efforts? You know, what can the UAB do, or is there anything we can do?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate you saying that. There may be like a letter of support or something as we write some of these grants that are part of that process. So we will absolutely consider that as we move forward.
Good.
Jason, I just add a couple of points on your green hydrogen. I've kind of dug into that a little bit. And I have a friend whose wife is on the Green Hydrogen Coalition. Today, it's about $5 per kilogram, what do you call it, to develop. The Department of Energy needs to get that down to about $1 per kilogram. Still out there kind of in the future. That doesn't mean people aren't doing it. And in fact, my friend was involved with the big project out there in Utah, where Utah, they're going to create the green hydrogen from solar, stored in the salt domes there. What do you call it? Which is what his piece he was working on. He, by the way, he was the retired president of Rocky Mountain Power, good friend of mine. And from there, they're going to ship it, what do you call it, in the gas lines, what do you call it, to LA. And LA is going to be burning it directly in their gas plants at 30% mix. Mitsubishi, which is right down Lake Mary here, is developing a a plant that will be able to go 100% hydrogen. But today, the cost of this stuff is not where it needs to be.
No, I think in some of the study you may have seen, that in some places, the value of it is tremendous, way above market rate for regular hydrogen, because it's green hydrogen. You have some places where they have renewable portfolio standards, and other places financials just go crazy. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for jumping in.
Yeah, thanks.
There were a few other things. I just want to echo what was already said about cybersecurity. And I know this is something that utility takes really seriously because I'm on the email list and I see all the emails. But it's definitely one of those things that just strikes me as kind of a not if but when scenario. Like it is. And so anything at all, it would be great to get some more meaty details at some point about what the utility is doing around cybersecurity, what plans are. One of the things that APPA offers is these sort of joint cybersecurity initiatives between, shared resources between the utilities and that sort of thing. So I don't know if we're participating in anything like that, but that was something that came up a lot, not only this year, but also last year. I know Fletch and I heard cybersecurity over and over and over again last year. And then just a couple other things. I'm still interested in hearing more about this. So this 5G workshop where they talked about recommending that utilities update their pole attachment policies in light of 5G deployment, and how that was a potential, the existing utility infrastructure being a potential gold mine for small cell deployment, basically for the utilities. And then, we already talked about workforce. That was something else that was discussed a lot. And actually, Tony and I talked about this a little bit, thinking in particular about, I'm sure that the utility now and in the future can identify places where we have shortages, folks that we need. And we also have pockets of relatively high unemployment in this community. And so it seems to me there are really good opportunities for sort of a pipeline here locally. And actually, I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit now, but Tony gave me a couple of really good examples of ways that GRU is sort of already thinking about future workforce issues and, is working on that.
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can jump in. I'm gonna back up a little bit to the cybersecurity. Our IT department, information technology department, they really lead the effort on cybersecurity, always have. That's something that's always been real, but it does absolutely, there's ramping up of threats and challenges, and we've all heard the horror stories of ransomware and how they can really hold a utility or a city hostage. So very, very real part of our business. The IT area is continuing to engage in that area and kind of leading the effort for the whole citywide. So not just GRU, but all across the city. And so there'll be more to come on that. And if that's something we want to agenda in the future of what some of that looks like, we can do that. Going to the workforce, we absolutely are seeing challenges. So we typically have around a 5 to 6% vacancy rate. So just there's natural turnover and all that's happening. We're more around 13 or 14 right now. And so that's quite a bit, more than double of what we typically experience. We've tried to speculate a little bit on why that is. I think one of the things is older folks in the workforce are just through COVID decided we're no longer in the workforce. And so you had some of that happen here as well, where retirements took place during that time. But what we're trying to do a lot of is we have what's called a progression through training program. And so we bring in trainees in various parts of the utility and really train them up, grow them up. And so you can bring in somebody that has very limited amount of experience, frankly, and you're growing them up in the utility. That takes effort, that takes something. But what the progression through training programs do is they essentially, as you learn skills, demonstrate those skills, you have a pay adjustment associated with that. And so from a recruitment and retention standpoint, you can tell somebody, we're going to bring you in at this price, this salary or per hour rate. And in 5 years, you're going to have different wages. Is something going on? Does somebody have like a cooler with a 12-pack? But in 5 years, this is what your wages will be if you demonstrate those skills that we're going to teach you and walk you through the process. And so it's a very good program for recruiting and retaining employees. In addition to that, we are reinstituting what we used to call the Utility Academy. It's now going to be called the Cadet Program. And both police, fire, and the utility are going to bring in folks and really teach them about each of those areas and give them training and skills. We're partnering with Santa Fe Community College. Santa Fe is going to have classes that they're going to pay for that are free for these folks to supplement the training that we're providing as part of kind of growing that workforce. And, we're calling it a pilot right now, but I, anticipate if it's successful, we may expand it, continue it and expand it. But for now, we're using some of the ARPA funds to kind of get that off the ground and going. One of the things that's different this time than in the past is in the past, it was voluntary. So it was Saturdays. I can't remember exactly, but 12 Saturdays in a row, you were committed to come in and do that. This time they're going to be paid as part of that program. And that's part of why the ARPA dollars are an important part of that. And then in addition to that, we're always sort of experimenting. I always give the example, we're experimenting with, the school system and school board of Alachua County. And can we bring in students at that time, train them up? And I always give the example, our 2 supervisors at the Murphy Water Treatment Plant both started here when they were 16 years old, in high school, vocational training, got credit in high school, worked at the plant. And those 2 fellas have been here now almost 18 years, and they're the 2 supervisors at the plant. And it was such a successful program that, it's something we are always talk about wanting to repeat. And there's reasons, and there's a lot of reasons why there's challenges to that. It's not an easy transition, but we do think as the workforce has changed and things have changed in our community, building up our own workforce is going to be an absolute part of the strategy going forward.
Yeah.
I think that's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we move on, the auditor is, Ms. Bigby is online and she would like to speak.
Oh, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Jacobson and board members. I just wanted to mention that our internal audit enterprise risk assessment has also identified cybersecurity as a top risk for the last couple of years. So we did perform our first 2020 cybersecurity readiness review with Mr. Cunningham's team. And we're right now in the process of our phase 2 cybersecurity audit. So we do also look for alignment with best practices and frameworks and coordination with federal and state and local law enforcement agencies. And we're really proud of the progress that the general manager's team has made so far. And I also just wanted to briefly mention that there's a new state cybersecurity act that was just passed in the state of Florida in June 2022. And there are also 2 federal regulations or laws that were just passed in June 2022 called the Federal Rotational Cyber Workforce Program Act. And the other one is the State and Local Government Cybersecurity Act of 2021. And it defines expectations that the federal government will work with private sector and local government to help the local governments and really all organizations be able to address cybersecurity threats facing all organizations in the U.S. right now.
Okay, thank you. On cybersecurity, it's an interesting topic. Is there limits to what we can talk about? I mean, at some point, are we saying, well, if you go to this part of our website and did this, it would totally blow our system like,
Yeah, we don't want to provide a roadmap to
Right,
threats.
exactly. That's what I'm just, at some point, are we saying, because I know we have issues and some needs for some upgrades. Is there a limit to how much questioning? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we could frame a presentation and just all the things we're doing and have in place and how that aligns with, like Ginger was sharing, how that aligns with best practices. And that I think we could focus on that as opposed to maybe some gap areas that we are still working on. So I think that's reasonable. I mean, our folks would be able to differentiate that and
I
discern
want
that.
to second the motion because we were at APPA last year. And I would say one of the top, let's say 3 or 4 topics that came up repeatedly last year was this question of cybersecurity in terms of real absolute urgency, unprecedented importance. So I think UAB will be very interested in turning our attention to that.
Okay.
And also, and Jason's brought up the 5G tower thing before as a real, I think that's tremendous. Appreciate you bringing that up. Is there anything from the GRU side? Always looking for ways for GRU to make more money.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can't provide anything tonight, but that's something we can come back with and provide an update.
Mr. Chair, I after talking with the IT people, pretty deep, critical understanding of it. They're pretty much up to speed on this cybersecurity stuff.
Okay.
And I guarantee you cannot get from a web page into the network.
Okay. Wasn't suggesting.
I guarantee you can't do that.
You could.
Good deal. So, and just, on the 5G stuff, the actual speaker, was from Fort Pierce. And so this was
wow.
a relatively local, person that seemed to be very knowledgeable on the topic, offered some really good resources. So if it is any, if you aren't already connected with them, I'd be happy to
Okay.
send your contact information or whatever.
Sure.
The last thing I'll just say, and this was just kind of in the, realm of interesting things that other utilities were doing, folks are getting more flexible in their payment options for customers. So I heard people talking about offering prepaid accounts, which Tony informed me that's going to be an option once we get into phase 2 of AMI, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's something we're going to be considering for phase 2. It's not a foregone conclusion, but it's something after we get everything in, that's one of the things on the list to evaluate what that entails.
And then, anybody that's interacted with young people in the last several years knows that, PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, the Zelle, there's a million different ways that people are using now to pay things. And so, any possibilities moving forward that we could provide greater flexibility to GRU customers in terms of ways to pay their bills, I think would be really useful. And then other than that, I just wanted to say thank you to GRU for sending us. I've, got a tremendous amount out of it, and I really hope that we will continue to send folks next year and in the coming years, and it'll be somebody other than me. As much as I'd like to go again, I know that Teresa would like to go, and there are other folks that haven't gotten to go yet. So, and I hope that more GRU folks will go as well, because I think it's a really valuable conference, really worth the investment.
I did meet one GRU. I think he was a contractor.
Okay.
Okay. Gotcha. I've been him. I don't know if he was there.
Yeah, and I was at a booth, like a vendor's booth, and I'm talking to the guy, and I looked down and there was a GRU business card like on the, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we're just talking to this guy." And I was like, "Oh wow, there's somebody here from GRU. That's great." So
Anyway, I talked to him for a while, and then
right. So yeah, that's
Was there any discussion of time of use and some of that kind of stuff?
in one of these documents, there, and this is actually one of the ones that I got from last year, the policymakers handbook, I think it is, talks about, actually, it's probably not this one. It might not be one I even have with me, but it's one of the documents that I picked up last year, talked a lot about rate design and about time of use. And I actually made a lot of notes and stuff on that because as you all know, we had a citizen that kept coming and alleging that time of use was this like draconian thing that no one's doing and whatnot. And it was quite the opposite in this material that I got from APPA. This seems to be like where things are going, basically. So yeah, I do have good material on that, but I don't think it's in this stack.
And how about on climate change impacts? I'm very interested. I mean, I really think the GRU is being challenged by the influx of people, especially on the water, wastewater side. Was really discussion about that, about shifting demographics and shifting populations.
I don't think, I mean, I know last year, a big thing that Fletch and I heard about was, that was right on the heels of what happened in Texas.
Right.
And so there was a lot of conversation about climate disruption in utility operations, and that was something that carried over somewhat to this year as well. But
there were 1,300 members, over 1,300 members, people registered for the conference. I think it was a lot more than what was there last year. And one of the things I didn't realize that there are 2,000 public power companies around the country. And, Puerto Rico has a huge one. I believe that Nebraska, I believe it was Nebraska, that has a completely public power company run their power. So, so I was very impressed. They had those two little places that were a lot smaller than ours. So.
One of the themes last year that Jason and I were quite impressed with were the presentations about how to make your board efficient and effective. And there are a lot of different techniques that improve the operation and effectiveness of your board. Although technically the UAB is not a board, but I guess generically you could say that it sort of is. And I think there's a lot to learn from these techniques that are out there available.
Jason, did you say one of your publications addresses that or no?
Yeah, actually, so this one, there's a policymaker's handbook, which was useful. There's this best practices in public power governance. These are the two of the documents I got last year. And then this is the new one that's just being published now. And I'd really like to see us get some copies of.
Yep.
And that's the Governing for Excellence, Raising the Bar in Public Power Governance.
So Robin, I did want to ask you, we have budget or something like, do we have budget set aside for things like that for the UAB?
It depends on how much it costs. I have some money left over for travel, so I can look into that. I've made a note of it.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide you with a copy of this.
And also, I can copy the publications that you have and share those with the board as well.
Well, I don't know if you could scan them and share them electronically. That would be
Sure, I
ideal.
have them. I have copies in the office.
We don't chop down too many trees.
Anything
That's
else?
everything I've got. Yeah, thank you. Thanks again. Really appreciate the opportunity.
No, thank you. Thanks to both of you for
Yes,
going
sir.
there and for the presentation. Really interesting, that outside thinking.
Mhm.
we could use.
I just want to underscore something that Jason said, I think deserves a senator too. As he said, last year, there was a lot of focus on the horror that existed in Texas during the cold week that they had. And of course, GRU didn't experience it that way. The GRU had a lot of liquids on premise and was able to come out relatively unscathed. But the overall question of emergency preparedness and responding to critical conditions, nonetheless, is still a huge issue that can make GRU administrators stay up nights and not sleep very well, I suspect. So I think it's something that this UAV needs to deal with and get reports on and maybe assist with, because all of us, with every person in Alachua County would share the horror of shortages that could really endanger us.
Yes. Thank you. And also just wanted to say on Tony, what you were saying about the training that was within GRU, I've heard from numerous people, it's tremendous. I mean,
Mhm.
GRU does a tremendously good job of training, and so it is, I think, a great, where GRU can always pay top dollar, that training is a real valuable thing to be selling.
Yeah, look, and let me just touch on, so, we prepare for hurricane season all year long, right? So, and frankly, in the last couple of years, we have events all year long that are microstorms or microbursts and things that mimic a hurricane. They just don't last as long, but they could have a tremendous impact on our systems both through flooding as well as wind and things like that, that we have to respond to very similarly as a hurricane. And so we are training, we are preparing all year long. I think you all know, but we are in hurricane season right now. It started in June. And so we recently just had a exercise that we did that really, we follow the NIMS framework of emergency response. And we did a recent exercise just to get everybody up to speed because we've had a lot of turnover in our organization. And so making sure everybody knows how to communicate and what role they're in. All of our employees have blue sky roles and all of our employees have a gray sky role of what they do in these emergencies. And so making sure folks understand what those are, that's something that is absolutely critical to us providing reliable utilities. The second thing I wanted to touch on real quick is I can't remember what all I've communicated, so I might be repeating myself, but it helps all of us to remember things. Eric Walters is now, we did some little reorganization. He's now the Chief Sustainability Officer for GRU. A lot of these topics that were brought up today that APPA kind of focuses on are these forward-looking things for the utility. Eric, that will be part of the responsibility of Eric and that team that he is working with is to really look at the roadmap going forward. It's part of the reason why he's going to be running the IRP process, he and his group. And so you'll probably see Eric at more of these meetings and interacting with him. And as we bring up the different ideas of where we're headed, he'll be addressing a lot of those. So I just want to make sure everybody was aware of that. And thanks, Eric. And I think you can go home now as we finish this topic. You're very aware of the sunshine laws.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Eric, if you have 1 second, I'm going to be running out too. So I'll just want to, and Lisa, real quick, sorry, I do have to run off. Is there anything that's changed since we went through orientation that I should know about?
There was a constitutional amendment, but I don't think it would affect you all. It's good.
Okay, great.
It's covered in that Commission on Ethics.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sorry to have to run off. You're in good hands. It's your meeting. Have a good night.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to do a very short introduction and then turn it over to Lisa. My introduction really is, if you're not familiar with the sunshine laws, they're very real and they really impact a lot of how you operate on this board. As a public utility GM, it impacts a lot of how we do business. And there's a lot to it. And so it's really important, even if you've heard some of this before, to hear it again. I've probably heard a dozen of these types of presentations over the last 20 years at GRU. And it's really important almost every time to kind of hear the message and remember what I'm responsible for my records, what's a public record, and knowing that anything I write or type, all of that is something that could be subject to sunshine. And so it's very important for existing members and especially important for new members, and especially if they're not as familiar with sunshine laws. So with that, I think that was the reason we wanted to prioritize this, to have Lisa come and do that. So
You just gave my presentation.
there were not any details in what I just said.
Tony is absolutely correct. The sunshine law, the public records law is very important. I'll get to it later in the slides, but to the extent that if you violate the sunshine law in making a decision, that decision is void, not voidable, void. So accidentally talking about a contract with another member of the board, that contract is no more valid. Now there are ways to cure it, but that's how serious the legislature is about sunshine. So I'm going to start with just kind of an overview of where the city gets its authority. Then we'll talk a little bit about sunshine, public records, ethics, and I'm going to skip the legislative versus quasi judicial since it doesn't apply to this board.
I was just wondering if we did get into positive judicial here.
No, we don't. I borrowed this from our planning attorney, so
Okay, okay.
So we have authority from the United States Constitution and the Florida Constitution. The laws of Florida, we actually, our charter was adopted by the laws of Florida, recently amended in 2019, I believe. There were some changes to our charter. The charter is basically our constitution for the city of Gainesville. It's our corporate document. And then we have ordinances and resolutions and policies. The Utility Advisory Board was created by ordinance by the City Commission. Your rules of procedure were adopted by resolution and approved by the City Commission. All of your rules of procedure for this board have to be approved by the City Commission. Sunshine law. So any meeting of a public board commission must have, it's actually 4 elements now. It has to be open to the public. It has to be noticed. And there have to be minutes taken, and you have to give the opportunity of the public to address you before a final decision is made. Open to the public means that, for instance, we couldn't lock the store. We have to have a security guard allow people to come in, otherwise it would not be considered open. Another instance is there have been times where boards wanted to meet in a restaurant, and the Attorney General's office has said, no, the restaurant is not open to the public because you feel like you're obligated to purchase something when you show up at the restaurant. Notice, reasonable notice. They don't have a timeline on what reasonable notice is, but the City Commission by resolution has adopted what reasonable notice is. Robin is taking minutes even as we speak. And the opportunity to be heard before a decision is made. It doesn't have to be at that meeting, although your rules do allow currently that anytime you make a motion, you have to allow public comment. But there have been other agencies where they might have a decision on at the end of the month, and they might have somebody come and have the public meeting at the beginning of the month. So it doesn't have to be at the same meeting. Yours do, but you could have the rules changed if you chose.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
So the open part of it, sometimes in this community, I don't think it'll be an issue with this board, but there are topics that are discussed where particularly controversial, huge numbers of people turn out. And so if that meeting were open, but it were held in a place with a very limited capacity for attendance, how does that work? Like I've seen, for instance, the county commission would have a meeting out at the high school because they knew there were going to be so many people. Or there's something coming up where there's overflow from the city commission chambers or whatnot. How does that interact with that aspect of the piece?
I'm not aware of any cases or Attorney General opinions where they said that wasn't open to the public. More of the cases have been where you meet where it's not accessible,
Okay.
where the doors are locked, or where it's at a restaurant. You're not allowed to meet outside of the city limits unless you're a small town and you don't have a facility. But yeah, I've not seen any cases or Attorney General opinions on not being, having too small of a facility.
I was just wondering, is there any situation where we'd be in executive session? I know lawsuits and contract, union contracts and all that stuff are initially in executive sessions. I was just wondering if there were any instances where we might be in executive session.
Not for the Utility Advisory Board. Yeah. So what is a meeting? And a meeting is any gathering, whether formal or casual, of 2 or more members of the same board with discussion on any matter that will foreseeably come before that board for action. So some of the areas that become problematic is your meeting adjourns, you're walking out the door and you say, what did you think about this topic that we just finished talking about? And you start talking about it. It's very normal. to want to continue a conversation as you're walking into the parking lot. But that is a violation of the sunshine law. So you have to be very careful when you're meeting another member of the utility advisory board, that you not talk about topics that are coming before you, or actually that have already come before you, because a lot of your things are going to be recurring discussions. Your topics about EV and solar and renewable energy. These are continuing conversations. So if a good rule of thumb, if you see a utility advisory board member, run the other way. No, just, how was dinner last night? Nice weather, that kind of thing.
So nothing in that round. It's like green energy came up tonight. But
No,
nobody on this board knows what green energy is probably a month ago. Okay, it came up, what do you call it? And it's going to continually evolve.
right.
What do you call it? There'll be thousands of things in newspapers. So you couldn't even send somebody a newspaper clipping of green hydrogen?
Good question. So you could send a clipping to the rest of the board of green hydrogen, but as soon as one of those board members responded, that's a violation of the sunshine law.
Okay, because you're not asking any questions, or you're not posing anything. This is for information. What do you call it? You talked about green hydrogen. Here's more information about green hydrogen.
Right. One of the things that I always advise, if you're going to send an email out with information, you say, please do not reply to this email. So that even newspaper stories, if you post an editorial and a UAB member responds, that becomes a conversation. That's considered a conversation. You have to be very careful with Facebook. If you have Facebook and you post something on your Facebook about the UAB, what we did tonight, and a UAB member responds, that's a sunshine law violation. So, and social media these days, Twitter, Snapchat, any of those things can cause concerns with both sunshine law and public records.
Lisa, can I ask a question? So I know a lot of times if somebody has something to send to the board, they just send it to Robin.
Mhm.
And that doesn't sound like a requirement, but it might be a practice that helps keep responses from happening. And Robin can have a template that says, do not respond to this, which I think she does when she
Yes.
sends stuff out. Is that just a good practice, but it's not required, I guess?
It's a good practice.
Yeah.
As long as you don't overwhelm Robin.
Yeah, that's
Well,
that's what we've been doing, is having them send things to me and then I can send them out.
But that reminds me of another way that some people have tried to get around the sunshine law is you have a conversation with not this board, but another county has a conversation with the county manager. I'm not talking about Alachua County either. And then the county manager goes to the next board member and says, hey, this commissioner is going to vote positively on this. What are you going to do? And you have that conversation. That is also a violation of the sunshine law. There have been instances where I think it was a sheriff had a breakfast luncheon and had several commissioners sitting at the lunch, and they were directing questions to him. But they were actually ended up having conversations through him about the budget, and that was a violation of the sunshine law as well. So the legislature is very serious about, and it's a constitutional requirement that people have access, that the meetings be transparent. Okay, any more questions on sunshine before we go to public records? Public records law is the public, and again, it's a constitutional as well as statutory requirement. public has a right to access all materials that are made or received by a public body, officer, employee, or person acting on their behalf and are used to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize knowledge in connection with official business. Phew. What that means is if you, first of all, it applies to Utility Advisory Board. And second, it also applies to every employee of the city and the city commissioners. And if you have anything that has to do with work, GRU work, it is a public record. And even if it's exempt by the Florida Constitution or the Florida statute, it's still a public record. So we have to retain it according to the retention policies. It's just that if we get a public records request, we redact whatever is confidential or exempt and give them the rest of the document. We highly recommend that all board members use the UAB email address instead of using their private email address. Just because otherwise you're going to have to keep track of what you receive on your personal computer or on your cell phone. And it's just easier for you to use the UAB email address. You've got that all set up, right?
Yes, I didn't get one set up for Mr. Paul yet, but we've had these conversations, Lisa, and the board does find it tedious to have to deal with two separate. So and I know I'm encouraging this or enabling this, but I have found it easier to get answers from the board when I need them if I use their private addresses. Otherwise, sometimes they don't see those other emails and I can't get my answers.
I understand, I sympathize. But if you're using your personal email, then, and you get a public records request, and there's a chance that the courts would say, well, give me your computer. I want to look at everything on it. So you run that risk. Likewise with your phone, if you have text messages from Tony, you need to make sure you copy that text message into your account so that it's saved because it is a public record.
Except if you work for the Secret Service.
That's true.
Well, and one way, I mean, I know like I've dealt with FERPA, which is, kind of a similar thing in education. One of the things that we will do with students, for instance, is we will email a student at their college address, which is the official address they're supposed to receive communications at, but also CC their personal email and just let them know, hey, that way you see the message, you got the message. When you reply to me, reply from your Santa Fe email. So, I mean, that's another option to consider because, I mean, especially for those of us, like we're volunteers, we're not on like a city email account that we're on like every day. And like Robin said, sometimes she needs a quick like, hey, can you make this meeting? I need you to chair tonight, whatever. And the idea that I'm going to get that from my GRU email address is just sort of like, not like.
So Lisa, can you touch on what would be a public record, like, the transitory type of an email or a text would not be, but anything associated with business or decisions would be. And the reason I'm kind of suggesting that is like, so, Robin could text you and just say, hey, check your UAB email.
Yeah.
Like I sent you in a UAB email, go check it. And then that UAB email is the public record. A text isn't because it's not
Actually,
business.
let me correct you.
Okay, that's why I asked you to do it and not me.
It is a public record, but it's a transitory record. And the retention policy is as soon as that's obsolete, you can delete it. So there are different levels of retention of public records. Hey, I'm going to be late to the UAB meeting. Would you let somebody else chair? As soon as the meeting starts and somebody else chairs that's obsolete. But the capital improvement plan for GRU's and energy supply is a forever document. You'd have to keep that forever. And then there are varying levels of retention. I don't remember for sure, but I think most emails are probably 3 years. So I will say that I get transitory messages from different people that are work related. I don't bother putting them into my email and then taking them out. I just delete them. Yes.
When she sends us an agenda, what do you call it? It has attachments to it. We have to keep them for 3 years.
They're duplicates, so no.
So she would be the owner,
Right.
custodian of
Custodian.
the record.
So they don't have to stay on my computer.
Correct. Correct.
Before we move on from this particular topic, I can check with IT. I can't guarantee anything, but I will check with IT and see if there is something that they can recommend that we can do to make it easier for you all to access your GRU email addresses. We've tried giving iPads to everyone, but I know sometimes they get really outdated because you've had them for a long time, or then that's 2 devices you have to keep up with. But I will check with them and see if they have any ideas about how we can make it easier. And
Another thought is I have folders for different things in my Hotmail account and in my, yes, I still have Hotmail and my work account. And so maybe you move all of your UAV stuff into the folder. And so if you ever get a public records request, it's here, Judge, here's that folder. And
Yeah.
okay.
Lisa, I was going to share just one more thing, maybe I'm doing this prematurely, but just some things to think about. And just, again, my experience over the 20 years is you need to think a little bit more before you send something, right? Like, think of it in terms of, what if this is in the Gainesville Sun tomorrow? So you just have to be more thoughtful that what you write is a public record. And that also, for me, often includes contextualizing kind of what you write. So, I could say one short sentence and it could be interpreted 100 different ways. So oftentimes you try to really be a little more clear on what you're communicating, thinking about how it could be misinterpreted. That's an element. And then the other part of it is, there was an example, this was years ago, that, someone just kind of wrote an email like, those idiots did this, this, and that. And then somebody read that at a city commission meeting because they did a public information request. They got this and kind of said, look how staff treats people. So there's just those are things to think about in your role, that stuff like that may happen. And so you got to think about what you're putting out.
In one of my former jobs, this was a horrible situation. One of the board members and her staff had a running commentary about everybody that showed up before that board and board members, and they were really unkind, and they were public records, and Politico posted all of it. She made a lot of enemies that day. So yes, that's a very good point, Tony. Especially employees of government, you feel like, we live in a glass house. When we're working, we're in a glass house. So there are liabilities that are associated with breaking sunshine law or public records law. Sunshine law, there could be attorney's fees assessed against the individual board member if you don't follow your attorney's advice. So the action, I talked about that earlier. If you violate sunshine law, the action is void. Just want to briefly touch on, a lot of times those things happen accidentally, unintentionally. And so if you have an unintentional violation of the sunshine law, contact your attorney. We have a way to cure it, where you announce it in public meeting and you go through the whole decision-making process again. So there are opportunities to repair that. A knowing violation is a criminal second-degree misdemeanor of the sunshine law, punishable by up to 60 days in jail and a $500 fine. Public records violation is a first-degree misdemeanor, $1,000 fine. Negligent violation is a $500, not to exceed $500, and you can also be removed from office. A public records violation by a governmental agency, if we don't turn over a document, the governmental agency is also liable for attorney's fees if we're proved wrong. Ethics. Did we have any public records questions before I go on? So this slide says advisory opinion from the city attorney's office. I will tell you, when you call me for an ethics opinion, the first thing I do is to call that number right there on the Florida Commission on Ethics and ask them that same question. They are the experts. They have a computer system that is ready to answer all kinds of bizarre, unusual, factual situations. And the Florida Commission on Ethics is the most helpful organization. They would rather answer your question up front than have to prosecute you on the back end. And so this afternoon I had a question before I did the presentation, and I called them. He was out to lunch and he called me back by 1. So definitely either call the attorney's office and one of us will probably contact the Commission on Ethics unless it's just an obvious answer, or call the Commission on Ethics on your own. Ethics is your responsibility. It's not the city's responsibility. So if you were to have an ethics complaint, you would have to hire your own outside counsel to represent you before the Ethics Commission. The good news is you will not have to file any of these forms 1, 2, or 9. Your position doesn't require you to file those forms. The ethics behavior, it's really pretty basic common sense. You've got your duties as a public advisory board cannot conflict with your private interests. So you may not be employed with or have a contract with any business or agency that is regulated by or doing business with the city, or when the relationship poses a frequently recurring conflict between your interest and your public duties. I think, for instance, if I was an employee of Florida Power and Light, I would not also hold a position on the Public Service Commission. Or if I were an architect and had to go to the Historic Review Board for a bunch of different clients, and it was like in every time I was there, I had to abstain from voting, that would probably be a relationship that poses a frequent conflict. You also may not corruptly use your position or the resources, or use information that's not available to the public to obtain a special privilege or benefit for yourself or someone else, and that someone else are family members or principals by whom you're retained. You can't accept gifts for the understanding that your vote or action or judgment would be influenced by the gift. The second one, the gift of more than $100 from anyone who has lobbied you or the city within the past 12 months, or the partner firm, employer, or principal of such lobbyist, or from a political committee or vendor doing business with the city. So, gosh, I can't even think of an example where that would happen for the UAB members, but basically, don't take bribes. For voting, everyone is required to vote unless there's a voting conflict. A voting conflict occurs when there's any matter that would result in a special private gain or loss to the board member or a relative, business associate, or principal by whom the board is retained. And in this instance, a relative is pretty well a broad definition, including some in-laws. And a principal by whom you're retained is an individual or entity that for something of value has permitted or directed you to act on their behalf. If there is a conflict, if you have a conflict and you know it prior to the meeting, there's a form. Robin, you have those forms? No? I don't think I do. Okay. You would contact the attorney's office or the clerk's office to get Form 8B. And you would disclose it. You would file it before the meeting and you would disclose it to the board members at the meeting. If you don't know prior to the meeting, but something comes up and you realize you've got a conflict, verbally disclose it at the meeting and file the Form 8B after the meeting. You have to abstain from voting if you have a conflict, but you can participate in the discussion of the matter. My recommendation is to not even participate, just from a common sense. What does it look like? Perception, but you could participate. It's legal to do so. And that concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Going back to the public documentation portion. If I, well, say one, Robin just sent me a schedule on when I will be coming to all these, all this, let's see what's going on in this utility. Is that considered?
It's a public record,
Okay.
but she's telling you, I think, because I just did the tour too.
Yeah.
So as soon as the tour is over, you really,
Okay, I would just,
yeah.
oh, well, I keep it all one folder, but, but I get, I was just, I don't know, hopefully I don't want to do anything stupid. No, but no, do any communications other than.
I would consider that a transitory communication, and so once the tour has finished, if you don't want to keep it, you don't need to keep it. I believe Christy Williams is still your public records, so she would be able to tell you what the retention schedule is for any document that you have. Okay.
If there's a minute for me to jump in here. The auditor asked me to let you all know that she's arranged for a more in-depth ethics training course. I believe it's December, I'd have to go back and look, but December 7th, I believe. And if anyone is interested in that, I can forward the invitation to you. So we'll be fine.
So basically, there's a training that's going to be happening for employees, and if you all want to engage in that, that's correct, Robin. It's
Yes.
not specifically for the UAB, but if they want to, if you want to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's on December 7th, and the Florida Ethics Commission senior attorney will be there to give a presentation. So if any of you are interested, I can send that to you.
Robin and Tony, may I just clarify that it's actually for elected officials, advisory board members, and officers of the city. And then board members are not required to attend, but are encouraged to attend.
Thank you, Ginger. Okay.
This is Not hypothetical, okay, it actually happens.
Uh-huh.
Timing helps out here. About 2 years ago, I wrote up a specification, what do you call it, to send it out to bid. What do you call it, for a solar system? Okay. It was bid on by several vendors, what do you call it, Barry being one of them. Okay, he happened to win the bid.
Okay.
All right. What do you call it? Eventually it got to your group. They turned it down.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
I picked up the telephone and I called the engineers. And I said, I had worked in distribution engineering. Tell me why. Okay, we had a long discussion, a nice discussion with this engineer. That was the end of it. I
Right.
call it. But we were subsequently approved to go forward.
Okay.
Okay, my question really is that had I been on the board when I was in the midst of that, what would it have been? Would I would have had to not sit through any meetings on, what do you call it, solar here?
No, I don't believe so. We would raise that. That's a call I would make to the Commission on Ethics and just lay out the facts. And ask in particular, is that a violation? What does he have to do? My knee-jerk reaction is that would not have been a problem. But, you know, I can give you the opinion, but they're the ones that are gonna enforce it. So let's get it from them.
It all revolves around the 2 megawatts there.
Lisa, I just want to say that I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. You know, I've been on the board a couple of years now, and I find it incredibly complicated and a lot of overburden. And I get confused sometimes, and I appreciate your help there.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions on this? And this is being recorded, right? So this will be available for future review if anybody needs to. Well, if there's nothing else on this, thanks again for the presentation, and we'll move on to member comment. Any folks that are here tonight have any general member comment related to anything that wasn't covered on the agenda?
I just received this energy increase notice. I was just wondering, is this escalate? Well, how do we say it? Adjustment is fuel adjustments going on right now, or and it's indicate that there'll be some more fuel adjustments in this winter. And
So-
how do
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I'll step back a few steps. So fuel adjustment, what we do as a utility and it's best practice in the industry is fuel charge is a pass-through cost. So GRU doesn't make any money off of that. And what utilities attempt to do, including GRU, is to set a fuel rate that will recover the cost of all that fuel that we're paying. We don't change that daily. So sometimes you have a fuel levelization fund that sometimes goes up and down because of that. But each month we evaluate, where are we with the fuel levelization fund? What is the price of the fuels that we have now and where are they projected to go? And then we set a fuel adjustment accordingly. Since November of last year, it's been adjusted slightly more than half the months between November of last year and July of this year. And again, this is across the United States and across the world, the cost of fuel has gone up dramatically. To give you, there's a lot of reasons coming out of COVID, world supply chain, the Russia conflict. There's a lot of things that have led to where we are, but where we are right now is, to give you an example, natural gas, we're paying triple for natural gas than we were paying 6 months ago. And so that, again, that being a pass-through cost, the way that we have to recover those fees is through making that fuel adjustment. So to put it in perspective, to understand from a bill perspective, basically last October, it was 3 cents was the cost for the fuel adjustment. Now it is 8 cents. So that's a significant difference on a 1,000 kilowatt hour bill, just because it's easy. 1,000's easy. It's easy to do the math. But on a 1,000 kilowatt hour bill, you were paying $30 for that fuel back in October. That same amount of fuel you're now paying $80 for. So it's a pretty, it's a healthy impact on your bill. We will continue to evaluate month by month, and when we can bring it down, we'll bring it down. Right now, it doesn't look like there's going to be the ability in the market and where natural gas prices are. It doesn't look like there's going to be the ability to bring that down anytime soon. I cannot predict precisely when, but that's kind of where.
Okay, well, that was the next question.
Yes.
Forecast.
Yeah. So
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'll share a little bit more. The other thing that's kind of happened this summer is it's significantly
Yes.
hotter than it has been in the past. And to give you an example, we looked at June this year, 25 days of the 30 days in June were hotter than June of 21. So there's a significant, we have a hotter summer, we have a fuel adjustment that's high, that's resulting in high bills. And so the other thing that we are really, again, trying to push very, very hard is letting folks know the main thing you can do to lower your bill is lower your usage. That's the only knob that kind of has an immediate response, is if you can use less energy, you can make a difference. And just to give you an example, if you don't do this, and you started to do what I'm about to say, if you don't have your air on auto, you have it on, and you don't turn your air down when you leave your house for work, and you just have it running all day. If you make those two adjustments, you can save almost $1,000 a year in utilities. And so there are a lot of other examples like that we're really trying to get the word out to people of things they can do to reduce that. Secondly, there's a lot of agencies that we partner with. So GRU can help you. You can call GRU. We can do energy audits that can help demonstrate how to do things. But there are also agencies out there that we partner with that either do direct payment, like they'll help you directly pay your bill, or do some sort of home improvement that can, again, have a pretty drastic impact on your actual usage, which will lower your bill. But for right now, the foreseeable future, the bottom line is the fuel adjustment it's high, and it's going to stay high because fuel in the market appears to be staying high for the foreseeable future. The last thing I'll say is the other thing is the one fuel source that hasn't grown with the rest of them is biomass. So our biomass plant right now is the most efficient unit, the most cost-effective unit running, because the cost of that wood waste, it has gone up, but not nearly like the rest of them. And so having a diverse fuel mixture really helps when you have situations like this. And then the last piece is really the other thing that we can do as a utility that we are engaged in is hedging, so that as things march forward, we can hedge some of this volatility so that we're not seeing as big of a swing. But right now, every utility in the United States and even across the world is really seeing these increased demands on all of these resources. I already said the last thing, but from a natural gas standpoint, it's amazing. Overseas, they're willing to pay triple what we're paying in the United States. So guess what's happening with natural gas? It's being shipped overseas, which is even putting more pressure on the supply here because the demand's not going down. And then as we go into Florida, obviously it's not as impacted as other states in the United States, but as we go into the winter, there's going to be a lot of concern with the availability of natural gas. because not typically you're putting some natural gas in storage and that's not really happening because it's being shipped overseas. So that's why I say all of those things are part of the reason why I say I don't foresee anything in the near future turning a corner. And so really trying to help customers either with these agencies or education on ways that you can reduce your usage to have that impact. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
No,
Mr. Covey, but-
I'm still learning.
Yeah.
But I know that I gathered that over the last few weeks that fuel adjustment was something additional to electric bills.
Correct.
And I just received that notice.
Yep.
And I was just trying to get a more of a concrete feeling
Yeah.
on the whole issue.
So to step us back, in July, it was raised to 8. In June, it was raised to 7. In May, it was raised to 59 or 5.9. So it's been marching forward, and so that again, having profound impact on our customers. The last thing I'll say is the reason I gave a long-winded answer is we are living this every day and very sympathetic to our customers for the reality that we're in. But just like when you go to the fuel pump this spring, gas prices were significantly higher, and there's nothing that those fuel companies could do just to switch that down automatically. And we're kind of in a very similar situation as the utility provider.
Tony, I'm actually going to tack onto that, if that's okay, with where bills are at for folks right now. I mean, anybody that's on any kind of social media, GRU is in everybody's mouth in the community right now. A lot of people are paying a lot closer attention to their bills, I think, than they have in the past. And one thing I'm hearing from people is the length of time between meter read dates and how that's affecting their bills. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because if we're talking about sort of artificially putting more of people's consumption into those higher tiers,
Yep.
that's a big deal.
So absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. So we were talking about resources earlier. Meter readers is a very difficult job to retain employees in. It's a very difficult job, especially in the heat of the summer. You're typically walking 10 to 12 miles a day. You're typically not in the shade. And so we have difficulty kind of keeping that staffed up. So we are down on that staffing. And so what we're doing, and so what that does is, as you're reading your cycle, like you get your cycle and you say, basically we have dynamic scheduling, and the dynamic scheduler comes out of our billing system and says, okay, Mr. Covey, you got to go read these 5 routes over here today to stay up with it. And if you're down staff, it's going to be very difficult to keep up with that. And so then it might push another day before you get that done, which takes your billing cycle from 30 days to 31. So we've been experiencing that for several months of that challenge. So a couple of things we're doing. And then on top of that, from a retention of meter readers standpoint, we have AMI coming in. Guess what that means? You don't need meter readers. So there's not a lot of people that want to get into a job that's going to go away in the future. And so we're doing several things to kind of try to change that paradigm. One of the things that last year, we had made a decision to hire meter readers as temp employees because the job's going to go away. We actually are converting back to permanent employees. And what that does is it provides benefits, it provides PTO, it provides holidays as part of being there. The reason we're doing that is, again, a lot of meter reader positions are going to go away in the future. But it's a future. We're going to implement this AMI over the next several years. So you have several years. 1, 2 is we're able to give a priority to those employees for other positions that open up throughout the city. So if you come in as a meter reader, we're hiring you as a permanent employee. You may not be a meter reader in 2 years, but you're going to have a priority for other jobs that open up throughout the city. So that's a really big thing that we're doing. Second thing we're doing is we're working a lot of overtime, right? So your existing employees are working a lot of overtime. it's a balance that has led to folks leaving the door, walking out the door because it's a tough job. So we've got to balance how much they're working overtime with retention. The other thing we're doing is we have a lot of our meter readers are often a launching pad to other positions in the utility. So we have a lot of employees that are in other positions that are ex meter readers. So we're pulling them back and having them on the weekends work and do routes because they know how to do it and they can do it accurately. And of course, we've got to pay overtime to do that, but we're utilizing them. We've also evaluated staffing firms. So there are staffing firms out there. It is extremely expensive. We've gotten back some quotes and it is very, very expensive. And so we're struggling with whether to pull the trigger on some of that because of that expense that it would take. And then the last thing, which this may generate a lot of questions, and it's kind of the last lever that you pull. But the last thing is we have begun in very limited areas to do what we call estimated reads. And so what that allows, what an estimated read allows is to keep your billing cycle to whatever you need it to be, because you can do the estimated read at 30 days. But what that means precisely is you're looking at historic use for customers and you're basically calculating, okay, for July, based on past use, we're going to assume they used 1,000 kilowatt hours and you're billed on 1,000. The next month, you'll get an actual read and you'll now know what they actually used for those 2 months and you'll make up that difference in that next month. So the customer is from a usage standpoint, it's trued up. You're not going to be off on their usage, but you may be off slightly for that estimated read date, which may affect the next month, either high or low. And so we have algorithms to try to do that as best we can. So that's one. Two is, like I said, we're trying to limit that to as few customers as possible. But you really using the proxy of what's reasonable in terms of a billing cycle. So not wanting a billing cycle to go beyond 33 days is a proxy for that. And then the last thing I'll say is we have customers that are not electric customers, but are water and gas customers. And so since they have less on their bill and electric is really the kind of a big driver right now, we're trying to focus on routes in areas that are those customers as opposed to electric, gas, water, wastewater. And so those are all the pieces. I will just say the estimated meter read it's a hard decision to make. It's really balancing those long billing cycles with this idea that you're estimating, and I think opens up a lot of questions for people of, well, what if it's not right? And the reality is, if it's not right, the next month it will be made right. But I think that's very difficult for a customer to maybe trust or believe that we're billing properly there. I will say it is a best practice in the industry. There are utilities that only read once a quarter. And so that is something that does happen. The last thing I'll say, and it really will be the last thing, is a big solution. The long-term solution to this is AMI. If you get AMI in place, this isn't an issue. And so obviously we're marching toward that. But again, that's nothing that's going to happen tomorrow or next month or this year. That'll be further in the future. Does that answer you?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we have a follow-up question.
I have another question. I know my old Gulf Power, or whatever we call it, Northwest Florida, they had an averaging billing, waiting for a year and then average that. And then you were paying that average price.
Yep.
Over the next year, and then if there's
True up.
At the end of the year, they will reduce it or increase it.
Yep.
And I was just wondering, is there something like that here, or are you, I don't know if there's any pros and cons about the whole thing.
Yeah. So we used to have that. We called it budget pay.
Yeah.
So it allows you to know every month your bill is going to be $300, $400, and that's going to be every month.
Yeah.
The biggest reason we stopped doing it is it was difficult for some customers at the end of the year when the true up cost them more money. It was difficult for them to pay that. And then secondly, it kind of led to this similar thing where we don't believe the true up. You know, we don't believe you're properly doing this. And so it led to a lot of confusion for customers and frustration. And so, I mean, it was probably 8-9 years ago that we stopped doing budget pay.
I was just wondering, I know it'd be good for some people and bad for others.
Right.
So, when you start, getting swings from fall, springs to winters and summer.
Yep.
Yep. You get impact anybody.
Well, and I will tell you also, Member Covey, that like this year would have been a tragedy with regards to that.
Yeah.
With the fuel adjustment going up like it has, you would have paid all year this much lower amount. And at the end of the year, you would have really gotten a significant true up calculation.
Okay.
And so, so I'm not saying that should always be off the table. I think those are the things we should be addressing. What we found is it wasn't that beneficial for the customer. We did not see it as that beneficial. So it was something we took away.
I had just two more really quick items. I promise I won't keep folks here a long time, but one is in the past, as part of our monthly reports, we've received the quarterly coal sourcing reports.
Okay.
And since, we've kind of changed formats and whatever, I don't believe we've received either a second or third quarter coal sourcing report. And maybe we haven't sourced much coal, but it would be good to get access to those reports if possible.
Is that something like adding that to the quarterly report type of thing? Is that what you're thinking, or just a separate?
I think I think that worked really well before, was just to have it as part of the report. I think
Yeah,
that's totally
we
fine.
talked about that before.
Yeah.
We agreed that that was something that would be valuable.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so we can do that. I will tell you, we have not sourced much coal. The industry has really changed drastically. It's very, very difficult to get coal. And so we recently did get a train of coal, and primarily what we're using it for the utility is really a physical hedge. So there are times with natural gas and these demands and the lack of supply that basically what happens is they put alerts on natural gas, and we're not allowed to use the natural gas. And so the coal really is a physical hedge to that. So we have not been burning coal, but in June, we burned coal for a little while because we needed that physical hedge because of the alert days regarding the natural gas and availability of that. So, but we can add that. It's going to be blank probably most of the time, but we can add that. Yep.
Okay. And then the last thing, I finally, after being on the UAB for a few years, got to get my tour of the water and wastewater facilities, Jerry's water and wastewater facilities this past Friday. And I just wanted to say to you that those folks were amazing, and what they do was amazing. And the thing that was most striking to me was all of the employees that I interacted with, which was many, their sense of like mission and pride in what they do. And it just really it literally like bolstered my whole day, just meeting those folks, touring the facilities, seeing what they do. And so I think it's a real credit to you, because that was your department, but those are just some great folks over there. And so I just am so glad, even though I waited all this time to do it, that I finally got to do my water wastewater tour. It was really fantastic.
So I appreciate those words. The best thing about the employees at GRU is their deep sense of care for what they do, and that their job is a calling to provide the utility services we provide. And man, I will just share with you all very candidly, right now is a very difficult time to be a GRU employee. You're not appreciated for the hard work you do because, and I understand from a customer perspective, because man, this pass-through fuel cost is burdensome. But it is good to hear that. And I appreciate you sharing it, because I will definitely pass it along Because, supporting what our employees do is going to be very important through these next several months to the end of the year. So yeah, thanks for that.
I told my partner when I got home, I said, certain portions of our population, like people that served in the military, whatever, get lifted up, but these folks are heroes. They really are heroes for what they do just on a daily basis. So that's it for me. I'm done talking. Anybody else have any member comment tonight?
I'll just. And I told you this last week, I had that tour last week and I 100%, agree with your assessment there, including the, that walking, talking, chemistry. Hello, Jody.
Yep. Jody's awesome.
It's like a tour of a winery, you get a free cup of water.
Not quite the same as wine, but love the sentiment.
I just proudly add that after all the delays that we had, I've scheduled everyone for their orientations now, except for Member Pro, and I sent those out to you. So if you're interested in having some of those tours, if you'll just get in touch with me, we'll get you a schedule worked up as well. So
Thank you for organizing all that, Robin. I know that's a lot of moving parts. So, all right, well, I don't think we have any citizen comment.
So the officer may want
Any citizen comment? Sure, please.
Oh, sure.
to. Absolutely.
All right, well, since you're talking about the fuel adjustment, I've heard that they have some money set aside for that, I don't know, several $1 million. Why don't you all use some of that to stabilize the rates that are passing that through to citizens?
Gotcha. So currently we do not have any set aside. There are times when we have a surplus in the fuel levelization fund. We do not have a surplus in the fuel levelization fund. Through the COVID years, that was really drawn down to try to, because everybody was in hard times all through that. And unfortunately, we came out of that without a positive balance, and then fuel costs skyrocketed. And so it's kind of the worst of both. So there is no surplus to do that at this time. Other times there is sometimes a surplus. What we typically try to do is, though, if you start to build a surplus, you use it. There's no advantage to really building it up dramatically. You use it to kind of keep it levelized at all times.
Another question, you brought up AMI. Will the customer be able to read that themselves in real time so that we can know what our usage is and maybe adjust it ourselves?
Man, great question. I did not plant him.
I know.
He did ask him to come. He did come.
These particular UAV meetings are kind of picked up some things.
So yeah, that's one of the primary purposes of AMI is it allows the utility to read meters instantaneously, but it also, there will be a mobile friendly web address that you could go to and see where you are. It's not exactly real time. Electric, there'll be readings every 15 minutes. Water, I think, is every hour, but that data will be available for customers to then make decisions on, we go back to this, saving energy. If you really have that and you turn your air down to 74 and you see that thing ramping up, it might help you to say, well, I think I can handle 76 or 78.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that will be a big part of it as we roll it out over the next couple of years. So what's going to happen is in the late fall, we're going to start doing a really mass deployment of these meters. And so there will be people that could start utilizing that like next year, but it won't get everybody until probably another 2 years, 2020 into 2024. But some people will, we already have the network in and it's connecting and it's working. So as we add meters, we'll be able to start adding those folks in, but it won't be everybody. Yes.
Yeah.
On that account, commercial account customers right now with GRU, we have to have separate logins for all the different accounts. Will this be a conglomerated where I could look at all of my accounts without having a separate login for each account? Because it is very cumbersome.
I can see that.
So, and even for like your rental, for any big commercial accounts, it would be so nice to be able to have one dashboard to look at all your accounts. And then also have those little flags like high water use or, instead of those paper notifications. So
Yeah, remember, I don't know the answer to that, but it
I'm
makes
just saying,
sense.
if we're
Oh,
doing.
no, it makes
Yeah.
sense, right? Even in my old position, each lift station that we had in the
Right.
wastewater system was a separate account.
Right.
And so we would have an analyst pull all of that information together so we could understand the holistic impact. So I will say, I will look into that. At the same time we're doing AMI, purposely, we're doing our customer information system.
Right.
And so that would be part of that system. And so I will ask that, how that's going to
It
work
would be
and
so much easier.
how accounts are set up. Okay.
All right. Well, everybody has contributed so wonderfully here. If anybody has anything else? Our next meeting is planned for August 11th, correct?
And let me look, because I made sure I got it right on the agenda this time.
Yeah, it's August 11th on the agenda.
Yes. Just a real quick note for September, we're gonna have to reschedule that meeting because there's a commission meeting that interferes. So, in the next few weeks, I'll get some dates together and send them out to you all.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.